Well, Elastic Path is now an entirely API company. So the only So there is a difference, right? I've worked with an API actually that had commands all the way up to the client, and client developers just didn't get it. Like, what? Why do I send commands? I want to, where do I go find this view? They couldn't get it.
Yeah. Has anyone? I know some of the regulars here, but has any of you ever sort of done an event source system using domain-driven design, planned one or executed on one or ever built one? Yeah. Okay. Is it kind of? It's usually some kind of repetition in that for the folks who've been here before. But shall we do a sort of 10-minute walkthrough end to end of how certainly we do such things and how we've seen them work before?
Or should we take advantage and just go straight through the Fireside chat with Scott?
I could do that, but Scott's still drinking beer.
I'm fine. No, I think we're going to talk and beer at the same time.
Adam actually invited me to an invite today to just tell me about the meetup tonight. Like 5 minutes later, I get an announcement that I'm being interviewed.
Not interviewed.
So,
just a
fire chat,
yeah. It's very casual. Sure. We don't have a fire, but
this is casual.
No, it's if you do this, then it's fireside chat. But if you do,
I'm beside Robert. Robert is flagged like a fire.
Yes.
No, I'm an arsonist, right? When you do this in companies who are not used to this, you're the arsonist because it gets you into a place where if they actually would act that way and do it that way, a lot of traditional planning and product, it's sort of product owner stuff and requirements gathering falls by the wayside. So what we usually do is we do event storming. Who hasn't heard of event storming? Yeah.
All the wrong people are putting up their hands for that.
I've read about this slide. It sounds very familiar.
It is, right? It's basically you get a quick overview of a system by looking at the end results. You have, for example, order shipped, right? You put a sticker on the wall that says order shipped, and that implies the sequence, right? Because the order was shipped at a certain moment in time. So what needs to happen before you can ship an order? Well, order placed. The item you need to, I don't know, user registered or whatever, right? And paid or user authenticated or payment method registered. So you start with that one thing, which is supposed to be a result of, from a business perspective, what must happen before you can ship an order or anything, right? And you put all those events in chronological order on the board. And then once you have that, you can, this sort of grounds everything else, literally everything for the entire delivery process. From that you can derive commands which need to act on something, right, in order to generate those events. That's why I asked earlier about this notion of proximity, right? Because you will find that the usual really dumb example, if you have a register command might act on a user, but it might also act on a ship, right? The ship needs to be registered with Lloyd's, right? Which then gets us into, how do we break these things down into meaningful components which aren't coupled. Once you have the events, they will belong to different contexts, different domains, not all of which you will necessarily have in your system boundary. And that's where the interesting discussions about language happen. So are we building a shipping register or something where users can register for an e-commerce site, right? The word the register command in one domain language implies totally different things than in another, and so on. You use these linguistic criteria, all English, all business language, no techie stuff, to, with a bunch of events you have, then go and break down the system into the literal pieces of plumbing and components which build the system, right? Using those criteria. Right? So you have your events, you have your commands, you have these aggregates which they act on, using the criterion of language and proximity in the sort of English language sense and meaning sense to determine what those are. And then you go away and build them as an event source system, as a model. Often it's good to not use any plumbing at all. It's all in memory, and you can then go and you build that in a programming language of your choice and show somebody a working system on a test or whatever, or with some mock UI and things like that. And then you hook up all the databases, all this other stuff later. And so that approach we've seen working before, and that in a nutshell is event storming to get the requirements down really quickly, event sourcing and command query response segregation. I follow this every time in CQRS pattern as a sort of the default system architecture, because it makes stuff loosely coupled. And then the crucial ingredient which stands it all, ubiquitous language as a way of deciding which bit goes where. And then last thing, you're integrated with legacy, which all of you know is the easy bit. Okay, so that's the sort of lightning 10-minute version of how one way of building an event source system, making the orchestra play the tune using all these different techniques.
So Scott, you had an interesting adventure with the last company that used Ruby, because maybe this would be a good chance for you to give a background about yourself, what you've done over the years, maybe how you got involved with L.NET, how that unfolded, how you came around to Ruby.
Why don't you do it?
No, I can't. I just don't know the details. It wouldn't be fair. I'll give you a very skewed perspective of this, but from my perspective, Scott has been influential in a couple of things. L.NET, the start of that, and a few other things. And so it's great to have him in Vancouver for 5 weeks, and hopefully he'll join us in a few more meetups here and there. And yeah, so.
I'm okay leaving the bio with that.
Okay. No, but the details of like.
Otherwise, it's self-indulgent.
No, it's not. No, we need context for where you're coming from in terms of the background to where you ended up with sourced stuff in Ruby, which is not really
irrespective of the resume. I think what I come from the early days of Agile, so that goes back to the world started getting word about Agile in 1999. A lot of us started in 2000. around 2005, Agile ended when Scrum replaced it. Scrum calls itself Agile, mostly in the way that, well, so many good analogies, rich political analogies you can dig into in today's times. This was a sort of good watershed moment for me, realizing that things that we attach our minds to really are usually, if you get in late, you're probably getting it wrong. If you get in late, you're probably not getting in early, probably not motivated enough to understand it anyway. And the real useful things that we can learn, you better find out about them early, or don't worry about it. You probably don't care enough anyway. So you guys are non-representative. You're out after work on your own time, which I think makes you non-representative. Possibly not susceptible to those effects, and possibly maybe you are, but ultimately, because you're out on your own time, I would suggest you're probably the kind of folks who wonder about whether or not what you bought into is a popular delusion, or whether it's fact and actuality. So I would say if you're in an Agile team or a Scrum team and you didn't start doing it in 1999, 2000, 2001, you're probably not actually doing Agile. Much in the way that if you're participating in democracy, you're probably not doing that either in our day and age. Just perpetuating a superstition and a religion. So along those lines, for me, extreme programming, test-driven development, which are the foundation of Agile. Without it, it's just a bunch of self-perpetuating project management twaddle, sort of an unemployment insurance program for people who should have been drummed out of the industry a long time ago. Nonetheless, here we are. That's gone.
We're starting to make that sound very.
It's a damn tragedy, because software development is difficult, but it's probably 10 to 100 times less difficult than it is when you walk onto a team.
And you walk on what?
Onto a team. Oh, you walk into an organization environment and you're like, people are basically following superstitions. We're supposed to be the pinnacle of evolution of human intellect, and mostly what we're doing in software development is following superstitions that don't stand up to basic scrutiny.
This seems aligned to the human condition. Most activities are like that.
Yeah, but we're supposed to, the amazing thing about it is we are even more immune to questioning whether or not we're susceptible to the human condition, because we're technologists. Technologist is aligned with science. Science is aligned with not being susceptible to superstition. But we are not actually in the science of software development. And I don't mean computer science, which is not about computers. The science of software development, the physics of software development, the principles of structural design that govern not only software, but that chair and even Robert. Most. Just simply are completely ignored in software development. That's also the physics of logistics that govern project management are almost fundamentally ignored. Scrum fundamentally disregards. Scrum might as well be Southern right-wing Christianity of software development. It has no basis in fact. It's okay. That's okay. It's just that we have to accept that when we're doing one of these things, we're doing this to engage in a faith and in a religion, and that has a place and a purpose in many of our lives. But it's just that you kind of want to separate that from climate science, or else you're just kind of another one of those people who's getting suckered. And who are you getting suckered by? You're mostly getting suckered by. You're getting suckered by follow the money. You're getting suckered by people who get famous on these things. So I got into Agile. It was the answer. It remains the answer. But you can't learn it anymore. It's done. It's a lost art. You can't learn test-driven development anymore. That's been ruined mostly by the Ruby community, which is astonishing because when I left the .NET community, we had one of the greatest communities of Agile practitioners and students that I've ever seen. I've never seen a group of people. It was so natural to have read all the books and to do all the studying and take our own money out of our own pockets and go buy plane tickets to go meet with each other across the country and around the world to learn and practice and compare. I compare that with a boot camp. In and out in 9 weeks, and you're an engineer. I mean, we're finished. Like that's basically, you might as well call televangelists climate scientists. Like it's done. You can just buy that title for $11,000 now, and it's over. There's more of them than there will ever be. Actual engineers, and there's really no such thing as a software engineer to begin with. So we're already deep in the heart of superstition country, which really means that software development and everything that Robert's talking about, these are all well and good, but I mean, the reality is you just kind of hunker down and accept a lot less out of life if you're going to work in software development.
Who had that quote about engineering having the sort of constraints of physical materials to build a bridge, for example, and software is actually the building materials are human interactions and communication instead.
I don't know. It sounds like Peter's.
Yes, it's Peter Hinton's. That's right. That's what he said.
Yeah, let's tell you.
No, I think I know where it's from now. That was from his last interview.
So I don't actually agree with that. I don't actually agree with that because it's not informed by industry. And industry has a better explanation for what software development is. And Mary and Tom Poppendiek already explained this to us in 2002. Software development, if you've got a methodology, you need to take that methodology from product development, not from construction. And the PMBOK from the curriculum from the Project Management Institute is sourced in construction. So applying it to software at your own peril, we do it. Frederick Taylor was debunked long ago. It's still the basis for most modern management. Scientific management has been debunked and turned and identified as a crock for decades, but software development hasn't caught up. And it's all of this like what we're told to believe. One fad, and basically what happens in this is you go from one fad to the next. Frankly, domain-driven design was a fad. And the problem is there's domain-driven design, the thing, and this is like bordering on the one true Scotsman fallacy. There's the real domain-driven design, and then there's domain-driven design that 99% of the people are doing. Well, that's a dead-end argument to make because most people, the 99% outnumber you. You've got a population distribution in the middle of the bell curve. You have superstition. It's guaranteed that you'll have superstition. As soon as something becomes popular, you've got superstition. As soon as .NET became popular, as soon as Agile became popular in .NET, it became worse. It was usurped by Microsoft, and they rapidly started redefining the definition of Agile and test-driven development specifically, knowing that part in the middle of the bell curve won't do their homework. So domain-driven design has been undermined by consultants. Agile's been undermined by consultants. Extreme programming, test-driven development. So we got out. A bunch of us got out early. It's like pulling the ejection seat, and we got out and went to Ruby because Ruby at that time and Rails at that time had not had all of these effects of being usurped or subverted by superstition. And superstition, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. There's a high priest or a high priestess. Follow the money. They're the ones that benefit. It's the ones that can gather attention unto themselves, gather the flock unto themselves, who will unduly benefit. These are the televangelists of technology. You have to look at all of them and actually work really, really hard to find out which ones are not just repeating everything else that the other televangelists are saying. You basically working technology through charisma, which means that it's, again, not based in technology or not based in physics.
Should it be based in technology?
Of course.
Because you're advocating, one could advocate two stances here, right? One is an age of Aquarius, the rule of rationale, not true music, right?
What that song is about?
Yes.
Damn, I have
basically, you could say that the key is rationality, right? The key is.
I don't think it is. I think the key is.
Like Tom not Peter Mary, Poppendiek, right? Poppendiek, not the 60s song. Peter Paul Mary. It's not right. That's the thing, right? Yes, but here's the thing, right? This is a form of rationality, right? It is based on messen, steuern, regeln, measure and steer and measure again feedback loops, right?
Yeah.
This requires a very rational and very scientific mind, right? Science being
It requires courage. That's enshrined in
let's talk about godless later. That's an entirely different topic. So you could say that's the answer. The other answer is embrace the reality of, but it's just not rational, right? It's a fashion-driven industry. All the indications are that people rarely act rationally in anything they do. And because of the aforementioned physical constraints of a bridge which will collapse in a river and has to be made from stone rather than marzipan, not being present in software, you get the full impact of how people really are. So what are we advocating for? I think it's a question. What are we advocating for? Yeah, are we advocating for the full embrace of human nature and shape the right way to build software from that? Or are you advocating for the scientific method?
Are we advocating? Listen, the one thing we can't be advocating for is a cop-out. And human nature. I'm not saying that's what you're advocating for. I'm just saying, like, let's watch out. Human nature is capable of both, of copping out. Human nature is capable of superstition and delusion. Just as easy, it's capable of rationale and critical thinking. We know this because they're present in the human race. So to me, it's just like, it's about being it's about whether you're exploitative or not, whether you seek the profit through harm, whether you seek profit by adding value. And I think we used to have this term adding value that meant something. It meant that you're only creating value by adding, not by extracting. So, create something better, ships will rise. This is the other side of the ideology. Where you're not really just copping out and doing harm. I know too many people. Any good technology, any good methodology that's ended up being crap has been exploited for profit. And it's not that you shouldn't make profit, but exploiting it to make profit, i.e., subverting it to make profit, subverting it, taking something good, reducing it to something crappy, but being a god amongst men in that community, and then being one of the only people who can profit. That's flat out sociopathic behavior, and I'm sorry, but geeks have this high incidence of sociopathy. There's an emotional immaturity. There is a tendency towards narrow-mindedness. There's a tendency, because there's so much ostracization in the youth of the average geek, to defend the community before defending the knowledge, and we are incredibly susceptible to charlatan high priests, and you can tell this. I mean, let's just look at Ruby on Rails. This was my destination. This was my exit from .NET, which had been subverted by high priests and turned into a pile of junk. Once we had Agile and Microsoft figured out that we had better ways of doing things that didn't require all of their tools, the whole damn community and the whole damn movement got subverted. It was the quintessential inconvenient truth. So we go to Ruby. It's perfectly good. It's got some nice stuff. It's got some very essential things. A lot of people in it are early adopters. Early adopters usually tend to be habitual early adopters, which means they're early learners, which means they tend to know more than the mainstream, earlier than the mainstream. It all went well, and then the exploiting people showed up, and now it's done. Like, Rails is finished. It's
working in Ruby, if I may ask. Okay.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, the same thing's true of .NET. The same thing's true of most things. Same thing's true of Java. I mean, what matters is whether or not you understand fundamental principles of software development, understand what they do to productivity, and this is productivity. We can't define productivity. We're done. And for the most part, developers don't understand productivity because they learned it from people in software development. And software development, the news, it's like the internet in China. Like, you're going to get the news that the officials are going to let you have. For the most part, industrial theory is not alive and well in software development. And it's not like you have to go to school and get a degree in industrial theory. It's just understanding the basics of what productivity even means, and how to observe it. But we don't have productivity in Rails anymore. We have a lot of Ruby, just like we had a lot of .NET, and those projects are crap. and working on them is crap. And it's a toilet. And you take the best people and they tend to want to quit because the worst people have made it even worse.
Is that a shared impression? I don't work in Ruby, right? I think it's, but those of you who actually work in Ruby, is that a general impression or?
Yes, let's go get a guillotine. They can lay their heads in the block. No, it's on camera.
It's nice. I think the closest thing I see is with the certain projects, like in Rails, like if they're approached with different certain methodologies, can feel like serving a prison sentence for a crime you didn't commit.
Very nice.
I'm not
That's great.
language.
Yeah.
It's not the language of the framework, because used well, like wielded correctly, like any tool, can be very powerful, but it can be.
Yeah, but the guidance.
It can harm you.
The guidance, the general guidance in the Ruby community inevitably leads you into hell. And that's, you read the Rails way or you read Agile Web Development Rails, you're going to end up in pain. And for the most part, I think even when we think of the best Rails projects are, to me, incredibly painful, unduly painful, because the most fundamental laws of software physics have just completely been disregarded. And Robert mentioned a couple, but we throw these words around and we're not doing any better. Saying, we're reducing coupling. It's like, man, we've been saying that for 60 years.
Yeah, you know, it sounds like Java circa 2000.
Yeah, like no one knows what that means. All that is, all those terms are for elevating us in the eyes of the community, so we look like more important. And it's like, that's not teaching. Like what the community, what all software development community needs is teachers. And we're all still scrambling for crumbs, for consulting crumbs.
Scott, can I just interrupt quickly? I'm not a software developer, but
Yes, please.
This is the kind of crowd you're attracting here. So I watched a video on YouTube and with Greg Young, and he was saying that every time he says something, or stuff that he publishes, people, the developers will completely take it out of context, or they'll elevate it to like some cult-like status, and they'll be like, "Oh, it has to be this way all the time." And so, even though it's the guys who are making the money off the technologies and teaching and training, whatever, it's also the developers themselves do a pretty good job of getting evangelistic about like this is the truth. You know what I mean? So I don't know if you can blame it all on the big companies and the big speakers and whatever. The community itself does.
I can't, because they know better. Same way I can blame the televangelists. They know better, and they know what they're doing, and they're doing it anyway. And a lot of it requires a soupçon of denial for people who are raking it in, doing this stuff, but they know better. There's no doubt that if you sat them down and gave them the right chemicals and stripped away their ego, just the right amount of LSD, and made them face their ego and what they're doing, that would lead to some sort of personal crisis.
Hurt many people.
And I would like to open that clinic.
That's nuts. You would hurt so many people doing that. Because why does it work?
Temporary pain at best.
Yeah, because there would be new ones who would
tearing away their ego from their souls.
I'm talking about the people who do what Robert just said. They might do that. You do because these people want safety, right? You follow those folks because most people in the industry just like.
Wait, who wants safety? The followers or the leaders?
The followers, right? You need shortcuts because the average participant in this industry is overwhelmed. You need a fixed point of reference. You can't go wrong doing what's in certain.
Oh yeah, no, that's how they're rationalizing it. But again, it always goes back. We need teachers, but instead of teachers, we have speakers.
Is there somebody right now that you would say has a very pure heart in the sense of is teaching for the sake of
I don't
teaching?
know everybody. I don't know. I mean, I don't know everybody. So I can't say. I don't know really anybody who's put out all the pieces together.
Oh my God!
Is there somebody that you're a fan of that you?
I think I don't think everybody has all the pieces. I don't think I do. I've synthesized a lot of the things, and I believe that it's grim. I believe the situation is grim because after having synthesized more of the pieces that I see most people doing, I realized that the amount of learning that it would require is way outside anything that we can accomplish in a scholastic system that presently exists. I like Mike Feathers.
Yep.
I like Mary Poppendiek and Tom Poppendiek. I find that they tend to be very forthright. And they're, they might not be like, exposing themselves as much as I want to do like this. But I haven't really experienced them being overtly manipulative. I think that they probably could make more money by being exploitative, but they seem to win on merit rather than manipulation.
You appear to be describing basic human nature, not specific to software. My first career was in fashion, right? Textiles.
Oh, God, yeah, okay.
And that was absolutely, you should have seen them at Intershop and at Meta and all that, right?
You see that roster, the bloody here, Robert.
It's a world of sharks on the runways, right? You're looking at exactly those phenomena, only far more blatant without that veneer of supposed rationality.
Yeah.
This you look at deep human nature, right? The only reason, for example, when I think the domain-driven design stuff and the Wickham's language has a chance of working slightly better, is because it speaks to that, because human
But it's
nature is
already
not story.
But it's already proven itself to be as subvertible as everything else. I mean, domain-driven design goes back to 2003. We've got 13 years of experience of domain-driven design being subverted.
80s object-oriented design.
No, well, I mean, yeah, but I mean the book. Like when we get the name domain-driven design, we all start studying this thing. It goes back to 2003, and for the first few years, it was a horrifying display of idolatry and superstition, and that persists to this day. I mean,
on its own, I think with a little bit of.
I think Greg did a lot to help it, but I think Greg has perpetuated his own cult as well. I look at the implementation. I look at the code for those style that style of domain-driven design, the .NET domain-driven design with the entity, with the aggregate class, and it's like, I don't understand how you can look at that and not immediately go to your designer's mind and say, oh, low cohesion, high coupling, high afference class, that's a mistake. It is. Everyone's doing it wrong.
Well, not everyone.
They're doing domain-driven design right, but here's the thing, in Rails,
That might be
everybody's doing Rails right, because skinny model, fact controller skinny model, but that's wrong in software development. It's right in Rails. You know what? Genital manipulation is right in some religions. That's just right.
Not in
But when we narrow down our focus, we can justify any amount of crime. We can rationalize and justify anything. I don't think domain-driven design's got it. I certainly don't think that .NET domain-driven design's got it. I think it's. I look at the implementations and I see all the design mistakes. Clear design mistakes. You just run this through end-to-end, and end-to-end will tell you you're obviously don't know what you're doing. But then I look at the players and the people and what they're doing and how they are leveraging. Now, you guys, of course.
Of course not.
Just got sort of
another meetup next month. And those guys in Vancouver? Oh my God.
No, I don't mean, but I would say this, be cautious. I know where we all come out, but I think if you read a source base that expresses domain-driven design, it comes from .NET, and even if it comes from Greg, run it through a static analysis check. You're going to see the problems, and the problem is going to be you've got math telling you that the aggregate pattern is wrong, and you've got the high priest telling you it's right. And you're going to, and if you don't know, you're going to fall this.
It depends. If it's easy to understand and small, and it stays so.
Easy to understand is a fantastic little quirk of the human mind.
Isn't easy to understand? Like lack of familiarity doesn't imply easiness or complexity.
Yeah, it's not lack of familiarity. It's the things that do befuddle the human cognitive mechanism, which is putting unrelated things in the same place. And I know I'm just harping on this thing. I look at what an aggregate is in C#, and it should have never been a code pattern. It's a conversational pattern. But people do this, and they've been doing it with domain-driven design for years. You take something out of the book and you make a class.
Well,
Actually,
actually,
right,
yeah,
class,
yeah,
right?
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
the
yeah,
aggregate is,
conversational pattern.
Robert, the aggregate
Yeah.
is an answer to one of the open principles of tell, don't ask. That's all it is.
Yes.
Not if you shove all the methods in one class.
Because when they just step back here.
That's just an answer to the, oh, here's things not to do.
Scott, if I may, because
And that's what I see a lot.
What is it, a conversational pattern? I haven't heard of.
So it's design patterns in terms of a pattern language. It allows us to have conversations about the same things. But the naivety we got, and you know, for domain-driven design was something that back in the day I coined as domain-driven DDD light, or domain-driven design as a pattern language. That's when we take the words we use to communicate with each other, but we make the fundamental mistake of presuming that those pattern names, entity, aggregate, aggregate, all those things, specification pattern, that they need to be in code.
But of course not. I mean, they don't belong to the domain unless your domain dealing with, I don't know, work orders happens to have a term called aggregate in it, right? So
I can find code examples. I'll probably find it in the event, actually I can show you right where they are in the get event store code base.
I can just pop it.
You know, Scott, the funny thing was, interestingly, Greg was saying yesterday, he was like, he's totally surprised that the C# community took up DDD as much as it did, because he was like, there's nothing specific about C# that lends itself to. It's really more lends itself to functional programming.
We really wanted answers, and we didn't have the answers. And this is the problem. I mean, this is where high priests excel. You know, here's a bunch of people with answers. I don't have to have an answer. I just have to act like I've got an answer.
Or it ends up
just
being
a little bit more than everybody else, right? If I just know a little bit more than everybody else, I can just stay one day ahead of them and lead them wherever I want them to go.
There seems to be enormous demand for high priests.
Well, there's such a vacuum of training and education in software development that it's bound to happen. Like, this is the friggin' dark ages of software. We've never hit the Renaissance. We're still like just drawing it, dragging it out and dragging it out. And why? Because those petty warlords of the dark ages are really enjoying their riches. And that'll go on forever until we actually have an intellectual renaissance. And until we do that, I mean, until we start looking at design principles, until we understand what it means to have afferents, generalization, specialization, what that means for coupling, none of this matters. And this is like foundational, like health. This is just hygiene for software development. And we're not talking about it. You get Ruby on Rails. You get this ridiculous proposition that we have in Rails. Fat model, skinny controller. Well, it fails static analysis, basic static analysis. And we do it all the time. Why? Because
most modern Rails that's written that way. Like,
absolutely.
I don't think that's the entire community who writes Rails. I think there's a lot of literature around that style, but like there's like other approaches. Like people are keeping the model steam peeling, like they don't like the business logic out into its own areas.
A folder called services, which is yet another violation of design principles.
Also not like, I agree with you, not like the answer, but it's like it's a step in the right direction. But
I don't think it is. Because
What was that other violation? I didn't catch that.
So in Rails,
Another Rails
right?
guy.
Okay, well, remember in .NET in 2004, when we all misinterpreted domain-driven design.
Here's a services in the event store.
I'm not going to go through the code base now, but I'll certainly send you, look for a file called aggregate, and you'll find it. And actually, maybe it wasn't in this repository. I said I'm pretty sure it is. But anyway, I can definitely argue this point. I know you want to argue this point in specific. I'll find you some samples and we can go over it in detail. However, when we all got domain-driven design wrong, we all took the patterns out of the book and wrote their pattern names in the code. Which you know, if you're doing that, you're already shit out of luck. If you take a pattern name out of a book and you write that down in code, 80% of the time it's the wrong thing to do. We had this thing called a service class, right? Thank God we moved on from there. It was the thing that was not an entity, but had logic and usually coordinated between a couple of entities. And then because at the same period of time, we were into inversion of control containers, it was the thing that you would inject dependencies into so that the entities at the core of the hexagonal architecture would not have to have service location, dependency injection done into them. So our core logic remained unmolested, and our testing remained unmolested by collaborative dependencies like loggers, data access layers, infrastructural things. That's the beginning and the end, you know? We got the service class. Well, we realized that that was a stupid thing, and without Greg, we would never have gotten straightened out, quite frankly. And I don't mean that, like, you know, there's things to say that are good, like spade is spade. I think Greg has done an amazing amount of stuff to help save software development. At the same time, I think that there's some weaknesses there that are actually harming software development as well, or not moving domain-driven design where it should move, or as fast as it should move, and as clearly as it should move. Ruby ends up in the same damn problems years later, Rails, and some person who had a tangential knowledge of the ancient histories of alt.NET unearthed some ancient Sumerian tablet with the service pattern on it, and we buried it for a friggin' good reason. It was not supposed to be found. We should have burned it. And all of a sudden, now we've got Ruby on Rails people going, there's a new pattern. We've unsurfaced it from the great ancient knowledgeable priests. It's the service pattern. Now, so how do you do things in Rails? You have one folder for every pattern, right? You got a folder for the model pattern, or the entity pattern. You got a folder for the controller pattern. You got a folder for the view pattern. What the hell do you do when you introduce a new pattern? You create a new folder. Now you got a services folder with a bunch of objects that are really objects. It's just called object. It's like you wouldn't have I mean, they shouldn't be in folders to begin with. At least not those folders. There's still no namespaces. And here comes the next 10 years of superstition in Rails. Yeah. And you just can't peel people away from these stupid ideas. And it's not just stupid by opinion. It's just run static analysis on these things and understand that this design is problematic. Did it make it better? Not necessarily. It's kind of like doing microservices poorly. You know, if you take a monolith and you just make it distributed, you've just made a slower monolith. If you take it's a distributed monolith. That doesn't solve the problem. It actually helps with the team problem, but not really that much, just a little bit. It actually is an optimization for source control conflicts. That's it, and management and team management. But all this stuff is so interconnected, intertwined, and entangled that you still haven't gotten to the point where changing one thing does not mean having to change something else. Which means you put those things across two teams. Not only is the communication between the systems slow, now a task can't be done until you get the schedule of another team synchronized. That's just ridiculous, Bob. That's why you see in the Rails community, you see at the keynote of Rails, people talk about, oh, we tried the microservices, but then we realized that the microservices are hard, so we fell back and put them back into the monolith. And let's call that, I don't remember the word, magnificent monolith, I think is what DHH is slutting around the conference community right now. It's an absolute.
Somebody's actually talking about the magnificent monolith.
Yeah. Is it magnificent or something? But it's like if you failed at microservices, such that you've got to fall back to the monolith, it usually means that you restructured your microservices around the model objects, which is a ludicrous proposition. It was always a ludicrous proposition. It was never the recommended practice. It's just that we got microservices now. Here's our new religion, ThoughtWorks. Can't make money on the failed propositions that it was selling to the community before. So now it's selling microservices. ThoughtWorks is kind of like an amazing company that it's like weaponizes software. It's monkeys for machine guns. It's like, hey, here's a new sickness. Oh, we've got a therapy for that sickness. Oh, look, everybody's getting better for that sickness. We better invent a new sickness. Hey, microservices. That ought to slow down the software industry for months.
This is again something human nature, right? It's basically saying that this is going to pertain unless we have a new age of education and knowledge. In the rat trade, right? We used to say people will wear this crap unless we have a new age of emotional maturity and self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
So it's just people aren't like that.
Yeah, but that industry it didn't say, so let's stop doing this. They said, let's figure out how to exploit them even further.
That's what we did in textiles.
Yeah, well, you know,
That's
why it's happening.
I'm saying it's a human problem, right? You know, this happens again and again and again, right?
He's calling us to keep coming back to
Unless you have there's something we're not seeing, right? What we're not seeing is a knack in this industry where it's aligned with how people actually are. That's similar when you build bridges because they're physical constraints.
So you think domain-driven design is the natural?
No, I'm saying that a high priest and snake oil salesman will emerge, but this time it may be the real breed. I'm kidding.
And they're already here. I mean, there's always, in any period of human history, there's always a handful of actually enlightened people among us. They keep to themselves, they do their work, and they get things done well. They tend to not find themselves on stages too much. Sometimes they find it's necessary, and they'll build a temple. But you know, there's only ever a handful of temples that have actual teachers in them. And it's a dangerous proposition to presume ourselves as actual teachers because we're all susceptible to that corruption. You know, you have.
But a lot of people need leaders, right? They need to
No,
follow.
I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people need to feel confident that their teachers are not exploiting them, and that need to feel confidence is the easiest thing to exploit.
So there's a difference between a teacher and a leader, right? In terms of where people.
No, I don't think so. Not in my background. Anyway.
Okay.
So I think when you make that
let's-
distinction, that's where you create the exploit. That's where
Okay,
you
perfect. So that's one thing that we could take away is that if you want to find leadership, find teachers.
Yeah, and know the difference. I mean, you know, teachers are highly motivated to change the world. I'm highly motivated to see that software development gets better because I think we can do a lot more. I think it should not always feel like a prison sentence for a crime you didn't commit. Or really, like it's like a prison sentence for a crime your father committed. It's just that he died before the sentence was over, and you've got to serve the rest of the sentence. Yeah, exactly. Wait for it. Wait for it. It's coming. It's coming. 20 years, the U.S. will be all over this.
Scott, is there a new Ruby or new, like, what do you add?
It's the old. It's the old.
I mean, what language are you?
It's not, but that's just it. It's not about language. I'm not going to go. I'm interested in other languages.
Yeah.
I'm interested right now in like one of the hardest programming languages to learn. On the off chance that I can find myself like on some island retreat where most like the waters are like you can't get to Alcatraz unless you're a champion swimmer. I want to make myself a champion swimmer really because I'm just ready to check out.
It used to be easier.
No,
You have to rob a bank or something.
Yeah. Well, now it's a tourist attraction. So I think that the thing is, you should take the language you're working in and take the framework world you're working in and make it right. You don't have to change. So what happened to Ruby? What happened to Rails? Rails projects got shady. So people did the same stupid thing. And you can see developer boot camps. Well, Rails isn't it. Let's do Node.js. And it's the same goddamn architecture. Like there's no difference architecturally. People say, oh no, it's totally different. There's it's like that's not an architecture.
No, it's a lot worse.
Why was?
Well, irrespective of that.
Node is way worse.
I know, but let's get into the details. All I'm saying is, it does not change the architectural style enough to be significantly more advantageous. When you flip on a programming language, unless you're really going from something that's like incredibly slow to something that's incredibly fast, and you need that, okay, that makes sense. But you know, like, by the way, Facebook went from incredibly slow to incredibly fast, not by changing programming languages, but by writing a better compiler. You can do that. But we just flip from bad to bad to bad because we don't actually know what's good. Like we actually don't realize that going from Ruby to Node is irrelevant because it doesn't change the architectural style. We don't realize that going from ASP.NET MVC to Rails is irrelevant.
Shit engineering is going to be shit.
Because, well, I mean, it's not even the engineering necessarily. It's also, I don't actually, I don't believe that there's such a thing as engineering except at the network level. But unless we understand what the architect, what makes the work harder over time, why it gets more difficult. We don't understand that. We're not even paying attention to it because we're not remunerated on knowing that. It doesn't really matter. You're going to swing from bad to bad to bad. So I think Robert and Adam are fundamentally onto something incredibly important, which came up with Greg in Vancouver years ago, that event sourcing makes things fundamentally simpler. And if you get your head around it, the only thing is, you've got to go through this emotional transition of realizing that the church is wrong about the earth being at the center of the universe. Not even at the center of the universe, for that matter. And you have to fundamentally go through the slings and arrows that people like Copernicus and Galileo went through. You have to stand up against the church, who's got nothing more than an assertion that the text has always been correct, and point out math that nobody understands, and this is why climate science is denied in the US. If the math is something that nobody understands, and if you can systematically, over 30 years, undermine the public education system, you will get to a point where no one can understand the math, or so little of the math, that selling the superstition will be child's play. And then you've got it. And then you can reinstitute the Dark Ages.
Well,
Which is really popular. I mean, I'm all for it if I can just figure out the charismatic qualities to become a high priest and just, keep fighting for the rebel cause, and it just doesn't work out for me.
I don't know. There is something. Here's the problem, right? When you look at the
let's make event sourcing the new religion.
So, what are your thoughts on cutting?
That's like science and religion.
Cutting against that, even a quick Google around these subjects, you find, like, you do Rails Museum, you find some shitty explanation how you graph like another database and message bus on the side of your Rails apps. Like, it's like obviously that's not the answer, but that's what you find.
Yeah.
It's like
You need
people may or may not
So there's people in the
know
world-
that's a bad idea.
There's people in the world who know that that's wrong, right? Those people need to say something and say it publicly.
It doesn't matter though, because if you're running a I don't know who, I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands, right, but if you ever tried to run an event source, for argument's sake, application, actually I get that to go in a real world scenario in industry, here's what's going to happen, right? You are inevitably, with very few exceptions, going to be in an environment where the vast majority of both the developers and all levels of various management and other people are doing it differently, right? And so you're in a situation where it goes like this, right? You build the stuff and you get started, and at some stage there's the inevitable, it takes too long, or if you're not comfortable with being able to meet commitments, it deteriorates, right? Not because that there's evidence, but because of comfort level, right? We heard it's safer to follow the herd. You disagree, that's good.
So I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
I proposed that we actually bring in an event store so that we could start documenting the changes that are happening in the system, because our systems get probably more and more complex.
Yeah.
But that's not a job of events, so why should
No, my point was, I explained to different people what it is, and it's basically when an event happens, you write it down. It's like an accounting ledger, basically. Simple as that.
Or is it accounting ledger?
Well, my point is, we're just going to write it down, right? What we do with it, we can do other things. We can come back to it later and build an index or something, or we can, it doesn't really matter. All I want to do is just write the stuff down right now, and we can imagine what to do with it at some point in the future. So it's a very simple proposition. I just want to see. I was amazed how many people at the C levels got that, loved it. The partners we work with also got it and loved it, because they have a way now to see, look into the past, to see what's gone on and interpret their own values without having us have to create some special service for their special request.
I think this is yeah. That's why I think that you guys.
I've tried this before, and it actually does.
But that's what I'm saying. This is something that you guys are onto. We need to change the default architecture from MVC or MVC to event streaming. And
it's too hard to teach weekends.
It's, yeah, no, you know, you want to teach this guy.
I teach in boot camp as well, I know that.
And, but here's the problem with that. You know, this again comes down to a fundamental problem of lack of education resources. Boot camps are celebrity factories. Like people don't go, no offense. I've worked very closely with the boot camp for a couple of years in Austin. And I'm ended up being absolutely disgusted.
Yeah, no,
Because they're basically fallaciously selling their success rates. They're inflating their success rates. Their job placement numbers are about as their calculations are about as truthful as your average first world nation's unemployment statistics. And they're there to sell the celebrity of their teachers, most of whom have less than 5 years experience in software development.
the dirty secret of all boot camps is that all of the top students they pump out have some degree of software experience before they
Absolutely.
they already had it some
Listen, you
experience.
open up a boot camp website, it's going to say, we'll make you an engineer in 11 weeks. Well, first of all, it's still a debate whether there's such a thing as an engineer in software. The only reason that exists is to take emotionally immature people and pander to them to get them to join our companies for less money than they deserve. Next thing, we're just going to, I don't know what the hell we're going to call it. There's going to be, you're the Jesus Christ of software development. It's like, come be Jesus Christ in our country. It's like, where do we go? Title inflation is a problem of the immaturity of software development. You know, look, we used to call them programmers. Then that wasn't enough. We had to call them programmer analysts. That wasn't enough. So they had to be called freaking architects. And after architects, now they're fucking engineers. What the hell next are they going to be? Pilots? I mean, we need to
Chief architectural officers.
Yeah, but this but it goes here. Ninja, pirate, guru. If programmers are so emotional,
You're already gurus, but almost at high praise. That literally is going to be a
yeah, well, I mean, there is but I mean, if you're so easily manipulated by that kind of pandering, okay, that's a problem. But we know that's a problem. We should actually stop and not allow it. So you have to have a company that has a policy that says, you can put everything you want in your business card, but in our roles inside our company, under no means am I ever going to refer to you as an engineer. Not a chance. Not unless you can prove to me.
We could be the
What engineering is.
Karl Lagerfelds of software engineering.
Oh, for God's sake. Well, at least you smell science. But back to this issue.
Closer to being tried.
Back to this issue with Rails, for me right now, the answers have always been there. It's just follow fundamental software principles and then figure out what the patterns are.
What are you calling fundamental software principles?
The things that
if you want to go out and you're, I'm going to nail these fundamentals down, what are they?
Cohesion, coupling, afference, specialization, generalization. Those are three continuums that you can judge all software on and predict whether or not they're going to be productive over long term or not. Also, we need to measure when we have productivity and when we don't. So we need to measure stop time or downtime, or what Lean would call non-value add. You can't just measure how fast you're doing something. You have to measure how much time you're spending trying to figure out how to do something. And all that time needs to be put in the liability column. All the time where you're doing something needs to be put into the asset column. Once we take a look at how much time we actually spend trying to figure out how to do our work, not even doing our work, then we'll see the real tragedy and the real catastrophe of software development. But we haven't even gotten to real productivity.
Even for those things you mentioned, what are the appropriate sources to get that kind of to really nail that?
Outside of software development, we've got to be interested in doing work as human beings in industry, but we're not because we can't be chasing around the next fad. It's like, I could learn that, or I got to go learn Node.js. So I'm going to learn that, I'm going to learn service objects in Ruby. I'm going to learn that, or I'm going to go learn Trailblazer architecture in Ruby. It's like, it's all new shit that doesn't matter. If you just learn the principles, like if you learn the higher level thing, all the other things start shaping up as derivative and they become trivial. Right? It's like they say, if you learn 2 programming languages, the other one that you do you'll be better at it. If you learn 3 programming languages, you start to see the patterns, and then learning the 4th one is a lot easier. So we've got to get higher and higher up in principles, in foundational principles, so that we can see all these other things as derivative, and then know which things to ignore. And we can totally ignore so much of the stuff in Rails, because it fundamentally violates all fundamental rules of software physics. Service objects, fat models can put all these fugues that the community has gone on for years. And they're not actually making progress. They're just swinging from guru to guru to guru. And
Well, we do have physics. I mean, one of the things that in my software, we're realizing, obviously the network's the biggest physical restraint we have.
Anywhere you like, just leave it on the table.
And now we're trying to delve into, okay, what about,
I think we're out.
what about CPU usage? What about, how can we optimize the way the CPUs are designed to have their long
Find
pipelines?
one, grab one.
And things like immutable data structures really help, because you can line up a whole bunch of instructions, get the data's gonna work on really close to the CPU, and you're gonna get a tremendous amount of performance. Whereas you're trying to share objects, you're trying to jump around from one part of memory to another to actually run your logic, you're gonna actually encounter much less performance. So those kinds of things, what kind of a platform or language is going to give you a better experience when at the end of the day you actually run the software through this hardware? That's the kind of things I'm interested in learning more about. I mean, I'm working in Clojure right now because everything is immutable, and it does want, as a lift, it wants you to line up what you're going to do with the data, and then operate all that as in smaller chunks right close to the CPU. I think it ends up being a better experience. But
that is such a subtle point.
Yeah, you're relying on the language for immutability? That sucks.
I think that's more like,
That
is this more along what you're saying, like Rich Hickey, who's behind that, he thinks very deeply about a lot of these things. I think, like, I enjoy a lot of his comment, Rich Hickey.
yeah.
Like, I just think that his approach to like what the fundamentals are, like Clojure was a vehicle for him to solve these problems, as opposed to like what we're saying is we're using Clojure to solve these problems. He was just trying to articulate his answers through a language.
The thing is, though, you take something like Clojure, or you take these things that are like let's talk about Haskell. You try to express that to a C# developer, like Greg used to do this a lot. Why are you trying to solve that problem? The problem doesn't exist with this language. And they're like, that can't be true. Like, there can't be another continent once you go over the edge of the world, past the dragons. There can't be a sun in the center of our system. It must be the planet. Like, all these beliefs, like, it doesn't matter. I mean, there are still people reportedly who believe in the flat Earth. I don't think that's true. That people want to, but there's still people who believe in a lot of really screwed up stuff, like climate deniers. It's like, that probably can't be true. I mean, I don't understand this mathematics personally, but my priest says it can't be true, and he tells me that I'm a superior race and I'm allowed to kill people who aren't. So that feels good. So how can all these other things feel good? It feels comfortable. How could it be wrong? Like, that's it. Like, that's the problem. It's superstition in religion. Rich Hickey has got this great talk, right? Simple is not easy. I think that's what it's called, where he talks about like how ridiculous it is that we spend all our time on unit testing. And he kind of like, you kids in unit testing. It's like, but he talks about like not that testing is bad. It's
the way we approach it.
But it's like we've got systems and languages that create problems that require countermeasures, and if we stop creating those problems, and this I think is where I think the stuff that Robert and Adam, why I keep forgetting your name. Robert and Adam, I've only known you for
7 years.
These are things that these architects like event sourcing and like using an event store and immutable stuff. I mean, you don't actually. So I would say like there's this interesting. You don't actually need an immutable language to treat this stuff. I think the fundamental nature is controlling where mutation happens.
Yeah.
And dealing with events as events and stop doing ORM. And which is a really, and it's not ORM, it's ORM leads to something. And that something is a presumption about, most people presume it should be done such and such, and it's so fucking wrong for the physics of anything, whether that's computer machinery, or whether or not it is a denial of history. It's a denial of physics, it's a denial of science, but it's because it creates a presumption of how things should be done. And it's that presumption is wrong. I still use
It's
ORM.
like comfort factor. People are comfortable with the way they.
No, they've been
reinforced.
reinforced by their priests to do
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And here you spend money by oversimplifying.
No,
It's a scientific way of disproving ORM. Like, it's if you actually study and do ORM, god damn it, did we ever do that in alt.net with ORM and all the stuff before Link, what we had to do to get a proper representation of manipulating data and all that.
All the crap.
And exactly, but what happened? We ended up going to something that had limited spanning of relations so that you could eagerly fetch everything. And what did that equate to? That's no different than serializing a graph and storing it in a key value store.
So yes.
So I was like, wait, if you do ORM correctly, you don't need an ORM.
Yes,
ORM
is the Plato's cave, of software engineering, right?
Was that where you committed suicide?
No, that was the other guy, they made him drink that stuff. But that was
yeah.
This is like, imagine you spent your entire life in a cave with a few other people staring at a blank wall in the dark, right? You're not going to know that there is an alternative. You have a worldview which excludes,
exactly,
right? And so
that's
unless
the
you've
problem.
actually seen this event sourcing stuff and so on in action, right? You're going to deny that the sun is shining out, and that's taking a bit far.
I mean, but that is the problem, and the downside is people benefit from selling darkness. People are selling caves. And that's
selling the safety of the cave, I think.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's
there's a community in the cave. You're staring at the same blank wall, right?
I mean,
Well, you're assuming you've got the same, like the illusion, I think, of software we're working with the now, the illusion of the now. And everything has to be in sync and correct given now.
Yes.
Once you give that up, I think you can actually make progress where you realize everything is actually in the past. And if you can accept that and talk about it in terms of how much in the
in
past.
terms of what events are processed.
Then I think it's a lot, I mean, you get more comfortable with the reality of what you're actually doing.
I think there's one salient example that I always fall back on, and why it's not ORM, it's ORM leads to entity centricity, which is a thing. And once you get into entity centricity, then you get into coupling. And coupling should be a productivity metric, because it says, if I need to make a change to something, I will have to verify first that the changes don't affect other things.
Well, that's the thing.
And then I will have to make those changes. And then those changes will require other changes, and those changes, so you don't have isolation. Coupling and cohesion is about limiting what something is about, so that it's not about too many things.
So
once we do that, once we get into entities,
that's the
the
problem.
design physics suggests that you're going to have something that does too much.
Yeah, so the thing that I discovered, and really early on actually, this is the first time that because I was so overwhelmed with learning and implementing CKRS and event sourcing back in 2009, that I was forced to cheat, and the things that I threw out were entities. And it's amazing the freedom that I got. That's the first time I realized they could just
you rename them tag and get rid of them. Wasn't that a great?
No, you don't need that, because what happened was I just needed an event store, and that was fine with the file system. I didn't really need anything. And my projections on the read side just ended up being, filtering all these files for the information that I needed. And I got it and I displayed it. And that's it. So skipping the entire OO routine was pretty easy. I could implement whatever instrument that I wanted, whatever service that I wanted, to create a projection off of the truth. I learned that if I treated the events as the truth, and that everything else was subservient to it, then it didn't really matter what path I took to display the information I needed. And that was inadvertently a learning lesson that I don't need an entity.
So what's the difference between the data you're storing in your head?
The entity is like an object that you give structure, and animal dot walk, and an animal is, or a dog is an animal, and all this garbage that really doesn't matter, because in the end you have a bunch of events that happen, And the only thing that you do is to translate that so you display this table on this page. Why does that require this bullshit in the middle? It doesn't.
But the data has to have some structure to be understandable.
The data has structure in the events. That's the ultimate.
So we're just talking about closure data, so like these are maps.
I don't care what you do. You can just bash
You were
and
talking
drag.
about data, right? When you say animal does walk, that's behavior, whereas an entity as such, that does sound like a piece of data. So
Well, to me, this
that's
is
not
like,
quite.
it's not about, to me, it's not about,
It doesn't really matter.
It's
right?
not
You have a
it's about,
thing you have to represent that, and you don't need to do that.
but the thing that I was pointing at was that when you get with ORM, you're probably gonna go down the path of low cohesion entities.
Yeah.
Which I'm just gonna call an entity. We're talking about ORM, we're in the space of ORM, entity means an ORM entity, which means it's something like, my favorite example, a product entity. And it'll have the product name, the price, the quantity in stock. Like, this sounds normal, right? In stock, maybe a URL to a picture of the product, right? That's a completely screwed up entity design, because the price belongs in the price book, the name and the name belongs in the catalog, the image belongs in infrastructural services, and the quantity belongs in inventory. That's like 4 or 5 different services. That entity as a single row in a database cannot possibly exist.
And that gets us back to the earlier.
Actually, hold on a second. It
Yeah.
can exist. The moment you do that, that's fine. And you've got this entity that's got a relational database with a canonical object. Let's move all the data into one thing. The moment you do that, all the code that needs things about the entity is going to attach itself to that. And that's called coupling. That's called afferent coupling or afferents. The moment you've got all this inbound coupling, and you realize, well, crap, we need microservices. We can't have 1,000 developers committing to the same code base. We're going to have to take this thing, this product table, and we're going to have to move that, all these fields, into 5 different systems. Well, what about all the code that's already connected to it? Well, you're going to have to break that out. Well, okay, but this code expects that it can just hit product and go .vendor. Like, what do we? Well, that's receiving. That's not even the same. We're going to outsource that. That's not even the same company anymore. It's a dead end. That's why people are saying our microservices fail. Microservices projects fail because of ORM. Plain and simple. Full stop.
The deeper thing is the ORM implies integration by database.
ORM leads without thinking to that problem where you take an entity and you make it a local piece.
Well, no, I mean, it's a fundamental.
I don't do that. You don't do that. You don't do that. If I took an ORM, I'd be like, well, what's the service? What's the service responsibility? Okay, I'll stick an ORM in here because I don't want to write. If I don't want to write SQL, great. I've got a shortcut around writing SQL. No problem. I have no problem with that. The problem is the product entity. There's a vision of product in the catalog. There's a vision of product in inventory. There's a vision of product in sales. There's a vision of product in asset management. It's not the product. The problem with ORM is the problem with Rails is the user.
No, the problem is that it maps things which can't be mapped, right? The pattern is an article. It goes like this, right? Object relational mapping. The problem is that relational databases are for data, whereas an object implies behavior in addition.
Well,
so once you get into this, you actually start out with doing this.
I don't think that's the problem, though. Oh, it is if you have behavior on the object.
And then behavior, in the beginning, it works, right? But you have then what you could call it a mini-list. As in a monolith in the rating, it seems to work because it's small, it's a mini-list, right? But then more behavior comes which does not fit into this context, as in bounded context, as in the domain-driven design and so on. And so you get more and more of the stuff loaded on this supposed product in this example, and suddenly your mini-list is your monolith, right? Because you can't divvy this up anymore because it's all muddled. Which brings us right back to the earlier thing about the problem I have with REST-based APIs, which are likewise around a data-centric view of the world and not a behavior. It's the same.
I totally agree with you.
How do you get around the problem he highlighted where the client or the consumer of this API just has one paradigm, like, and you need, like, as part of your product's requirement to service these people.
Separate that.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you'd have to put as another layer in front, wouldn't you?
It's supposed to be, yeah, I mean, it's.
Like, I don't disagree. I'm just saying here's a legitimate issue that
Well, let's go
touch it.
Here's a fundamental principle of service or service autonomy or microservices. Now, unfortunately, the microservices people, microservices are like selling cigarettes without that big black label on. It's like if you peel that off, if you can peel like it's like a box of Demorier extra strong, extra killer, right? And you peel out, it's like, oh, look, somebody stuck another name on it. You peel it back, and it's like, oh, it's not candy cigarettes, it's Demorier extra death. That's ThoughtWorks. It's like microservices. It's like you peel it back, it's like, oh shit, this is SOA with the warning labels torn off. Why is that good? Well, look, I mean, if you can make oxycodone over the counter, imagine how much money we can make. And that's what microservices are. That's what ThoughtWorks does, and this is a real problem. Because once you get
Really heroin.
once you know, it's just heroin. You just sell if heroin was just over the counter, which I mean, this analogy is breaking down because that might not actually. It's not actually necessarily.
Right here, we'll actually talk about how can you create a microservice infrastructure or ecosystem that can be.
Well, they're taking this. Let me say, they're taking some of the things that are fundamental about autonomous services and failing to mention them, such as services don't return data. You can't query a service for data. I've got a service. It's a product service. Let me go get the product name and the price. It's like you can't do that with a service. Services don't return data. We have a name for the thing that returns data. It's called a database. Services do not respond to queries ever. That fundamental change will.
Command oriented. So like,
What's that?
Services would only respond to commands.
Well, they might not even respond. They just do things. Yeah. But that means that you're going to be like, well, crap. I've got to figure out the cost optimization. How am I going to do that without the data? It's like, well, you basically that data is supposed to already be there. That's what I'm saying. When you get the product table, like the stuff for the data for the quantity in stock doesn't belong, with the catalog. You tell the inventory service to deduct or reserve some quantity. You don't ask it what's in stock and then say, great, you've got enough in stock. Great, I'm taking 2 out. It's like, oh, in the meantime, something else is happening.
They basically service things and don't ask.
Yeah. Autonomous services. But there is no such thing as anything other service that isn't an autonomous service. Like what we get with microservices is people going like, oh, services. I have those already. I've got a folder called services. Why don't I put an HTTP API in front of them? And it's like, oh, it's done. We can't have nice names because consultants are basically raping the industry and basically this is just more sociopathy. It's people keeping other people down rather than raising them up. Because it's really a lot easier to keep people down and profit from them than raising them up.
But it didn't really touch why services can't really be queried.
Well, I'm ranting about sociology now. I don't know why we need to go back to that.
To services?
Right.
No, I think it's from the. Can we briefly? I'm trying to add a segue on in fact the sociology.
We need to get back to the point where you and Adam are selling your consulting services. I'm getting to that.
They sell them.
I think we better change things. That's all we
See, you open up a totally new avenue for us. If we turn into high priests, would we wear vestments of some sort, right?
I think you should.
Would we wear anything, Scott?
If you're going to be high priest, yeah, I mean, you might as well just wear the vestments.
Yeah.
So don't be shy about it. Just be it.
Back to why shouldn't you create a service, right? I find that the answer in practice
increases coupling. And
yes, why does it do that? Because usually when you query stuff, it's no longer a single domain, right? If you have a report or you have a user interface, then usually it spans. If you look at this stuff, it spans a lot of different domains and perhaps within that context and perhaps in other contexts. So that means if you have one query which queries more than one shot from something, that thing is by its nature a central point of coupling the reason why this matters when you have a transactional thing, a state machine, if you will, and why it doesn't matter if you have a read model is because the state machine has behavior, which depends on things being in a certain state. And now I lost my thread because I was thinking about sociology. But the point is, it's a lot easier to keep things separate, because if you query your service, you won't be able to, because inevitably extraneous things sneak in, right?
So tying it into like the CQRS architecture, so obviously your services are sitting squarely on the command side of the fence. Like it has nothing to do with this query side. So you mentioned that we've got, for getting our data, we have this thing called a database, which seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and by the way, putting an HTTP interface in front of a database is just a database with an HTTP interface.
Yeah,
It's okay to do it too.
Lots of things help people sleep at night.
I kind of lost my thread, but that's like a really simple example, right? Imagine you have a service which needs shoe size to make some sort of business decision based on it, right? Now, if it doesn't know if I need the name of the person whose shoes they are, but the odds are that your user interface or report might need the name and the shoe size. That means that suddenly your quote-unquote service would know a name in it, a name of a person or something, and now it magnify that, right? Suddenly you have lots of pieces of information in there which are not ever used for decision making in any of this stuff. Right there is a problem, right? Because it is more complicated.
Services.
What happens in together?
I mean, it's related.
That's why the name's in the database. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking about database normalization rules. The forms of normalization really apply to a lot of domains besides databases. You don't want to group things together where one is going to change faster than the other one. Like address should never have a name, because the name's going to change more often than the address aspect. So,
but if people, like in the DBA space, right, this might be for this whole sort of thing, if people would actually correctly apply third normal form and all this stuff, a lot of these problems would go away would be a lot less serious, because in the end it has the same goal, right? Don't put unrelated things together and so forth. So one of the goals, to some extent.
Commands are being performed through these services, and eventually some of those services may or may not persist like an event in an event store. So we're building up this transaction history. And then what is, I think in the DVD terms, it's a projection. So your projection is where you may need to get all these different pieces of events out of thing and put it back together, something that can actually be used back in sort of a user interface or something that sort of groups that back together. Layering that back, so you talk about this and like see where some of this is going. At this point, does it matter if like when those services push through to their stores, is those stores like, is it a common practice to have like a single database at the end of that related thing, one, many, the service has its own, but like that query, if you have to join that data, knows to where all of those data stores are, has to back up. Like, how do you get, like, I can't see through
by the time you're
on the query side of things.
By the time you're doing queries, like by the time we're doing queries, we're not dealing, like that's outside of the subject matter of autonomous services. It's needed nonetheless, but when we're talking about services, we're really talking about, transaction processing. Or forget that. We're talking about like
mutating the system.
We're talking about processing. We're talking about queries. It doesn't matter how those tables are created, but you create tables for the queries that you need to do.
Wouldn't we be pushing some of that coupling and like tying knowledge together? Like you talked about that object with the product and everything going in. Wouldn't that start happening on the query side?
Oh, sure, of course.
But it's on the sub. It's not as important.
Yeah.
You're not relying on that for state transitions, really.
It's not manipulating the system. It's just reflecting the system back to you. But in terms of productivity, that's all like writing code and stuff. But there still must be an overhead.
Problem is when you go like the product table and you go like, oh, the product table is all these things and it's being painted on the screen. And it's also that department has a connection string to our database and they're going to display that product and they import our products in next time. It's like, great. Hey, now we need to break this product table into 5 different systems. And you get the message from the manager above those two teams saying, hey, I heard from that team that you're gonna break their systems if you change your stuff, so you're not allowed to change your tables because it's gonna harm them. It's like, like, why are they connected to our stuff?
Yeah.
Like, you know, the reason we have sphincters on our bodies is so that the insides are not connected to the outside. And that we can control intake and outflow.
Is that a pattern?
Like, it's amazing that, like,
To some extent.
developers can't actually look at their own, well, I mean, some developers can't see most of their own body. Anyway, different subject. But it's amazing we can't look at all the analogies we have in the real world and just say, like,
the body of knowledge, of course.
of course, not the gigantic body of flesh.
But there's obviously some you take it here.
That was really strange divergence.
It's not the first we've.
I wouldn't have even brought that up if Robert hadn't mentioned investments. It's been on my mind the entire time, so it's not even my fault. Yeah, so, you know, we the whole data thing, you make the data, and the best thing you can do when you're dealing on the data side, now that the reporting, or what we call reporting, anything that's display or read, you know, anything that's read, now that the real time stuff is not dealing with the same data stores, those read data stores can be anything they want. And you're free to make them whatever. You're free to do deduplication and denormalization, and you're free to create a row that has 1 billion records, 1 billion columns in it, because it makes it easier for someone to get all the information they want in one query, because they're opening it up with Excel rather than a piece of software. It's like, what queries do you need? Great, I'll design a row. As much as I can, I'll design one row. This is what's good about Cassandra. Cassandra is a database that you design entirely for the queries, without concern of normalization, because you have one event that's got like, oh, that data goes into that row, that data goes into that table, this data is going to go into that spreadsheet, this one's going to go over there to that system, and like that's just read data. You just let it be what the users need it to be. And if it's got rot, then at least it's just rot in that aspect of the system.
But there's still a place where dead bodies pile up.
Yes, it is, but they're all
They're on your lawn instead of your garage.
But because you've already embraced duplication, you're allowing the data to be denormalized, you're allowing it to be duplicated, you're allowing multiple representations to exist. You've already got infrastructure saying, hey, this one's a dead body, we've still got to pilot it, because there's one guy in the basement who still reads that with Fox.
You just start a new one,
You start a new one, yeah. I mean, that's just, you gotta manage
why the dead bodies matter less, right? It's because when it's a read model, when they're in the read model, they don't create feedback loops, right? If you would have the same thing in a transactional thing, which affects it, hopefully explicit, but in this graph, often implicit state machine, right? That's where you get the analog of a trigger inserting a row, triggering something else, and so on. It cascades.
Yeah,
in a read model, it's not.
I
It may not somebody's brain just stares at the screen, right? But that's it. That's why it's a lot safer. It's because it doesn't feed back into it,
and also
creating state chaos.
Oh, speaking of Rails, all this notion of callbacks on entities, that is a travesty of. It's amazing that a brain, like you start with a human brain and you end up with Rails callbacks. Like, how did that happen? Like, that doesn't even seem possible.
What are Rails?
Callbacks are like you know, it's a bunch of different things you can hook into. Like, when something is instantiated, you get the on new. When something is saved to the database, you get on created. When something is deleted, it's triggers.
Okay.
They're not actually events, because they're
That's
actually
not
happening.
this context.
No, they're like unintended side effects waiting to happen.
Well, I mean, anybody can hook into those. So, like, yeah, you're trying to test something, and it's like, I'm trying to test something, but this, you know, I just fired a missile.
Literally.
Like, what the hell? Like, oh yeah, I put my missile firing thing in the create enemy. There's an if statement that depends on the environment variable to see whether or not they presently are an enemy. But if it's not set, it just fires a missile. Like, it's like, don't do that.
No,
So, you know, when we get, ultimately when you get down, the amazing thing about the read model side is, if we couple the reporting to the operational real-time data, then that real-time data can't change when it needs to. When the business changed, when the system changed, when the requirements changed, that thing can't change because things are displaying off of it. And that stuff just needs to be, the things that's like coupled it to it for ancillary purpose, like explaining, need to be removed. So this stuff has the freedom to adapt as fast as a business needs to adapt. And coupling is the only thing. Like coupling should be renamed to some sort of metric that means how fast you can adapt business-wise.
Yeah.
It should have been called agility. Unfortunately, Scrum fucked that up for all of us. So it's really the agility. How fast you can adapt the business depends on how much entanglement, ancillary and unnecessary entanglement you have with core pieces. And that stuff should never be there. But we have this pattern called read, modify, write. I take a canonical row, I read it out of the database, I change its values, I write it back. It's like that's the problem.
It could flow into the Scrum practice, right? It could be an entirely new way of doing this. We could call it Scrumbling.
Scrum is just way too waterfall. Like, it's all it is.
Well, that's the way it's practiced. It wasn't originally. Scrum was basically like, used to be, there was extreme programming, which was how to do Agile. And then there was this asterisk, which was Scrum, which was how to create user stories and move them around. It actually took extreme programming and gave it some necessary missing pieces. What Scrum realized was they can make a lot more money if they just made a religion out of it, which is,
Yeah, now it's totally, you don't even hear about XP practices.
And it's the
Are
only
you Agile? That means
agile.
you're Scrum.
It's the only agile that matters. In fact, when there was so much lobbying on Scrum in the late 2000s to adopt XP program practices, they would not budge unless they called it Scrum programmer practices. So they took XP, and they retrofitted it to Scrum. Of course, since it's Scrum, it got muddied down, watered down.
I just gave up the fight. I used to be an Agile Vancouver,
I
brought you here once or twice,
Yeah.
right, for that.
Yeah.
And every time, my goal was to butt heads with every single one on that board to say, why is there no TDD talks? Why is there no BDD talks? Why are we not talking about
did a
the
couple
country? Well, only because I insisted. You go to the thing now, go to the conference now and see who goes. See who's
Well,
speaking
you
out
know,
now.
look at
It's all like life
Yeah,
coach
no,
and hand wavy.
So look at test-driven development though in the program model. You know, a year ago, we get the creator of Rails publishing a blog post that says TDD is dead, long live testing, in which he illustrates that he never understood TDD. But he still wrote the blog post, and he still got millions of readers.
Was that the one that he argued with Fowler? Was that the
Yeah.
one where and then Fowler didn't bother to take advantage?
Well, then
of
they
it?
did a video series of dialogues with Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, and the author of Rails, and talking about this perspective. And there were so many things that were said that were absolutely wrong, but they were so like flagrantly wrong. It seemed like the two people who understood TDD were so shocked they didn't call him on. It's kind of like watching an interview with Donald Trump. It's so shocking.
You just don't bother.
He's so shocking that the interviewers are like, they go into like the feedback loop and they get dumbstruck and they just stop talking. And
So
then,
what kind of stuff did they throw? I actually haven't heard of this.
Well, you haven't heard of this, so you gotta watch it. Everyone has to watch that.
a lot of things are fundamentally wrong. But the thing is,
Yeah.
what turns out was that all along, and what many of us have been saying for many years, that this person had been doing test-first programming, which we differentiate from test-driven development.
Yep.
Except that they look exactly the same from the outside. And if you don't know TDD, you won't know that you're doing test-first programming. Which is the same old, it's right back to where we started.
So
This is
some elaboration, right?
the
Because
superstition taking over for the science.
maybe that requires some. This makes me feel that I did it wrong all along, right?
Of course.
I felt that TDD is, TDD is unfortunate because it's not about testing. It's a way of getting a better decomposition of my programs by writing about the outcome first.
Yeah, but you already know that. Like, if you go to somebody who's only doing test-first programming, what you just said is self-indulgent twaddle. That's what I'm saying. This is the other problem.
Could be.
This is the problem. Like, when we become experts, and one day I want to be.
I feel that I had it wrong, right? I'm not making this
Oh, no, I get you. And that will keep you sharp.
That
It's the
now,
people,
however, the last
people who feel that they
sentence,
don't have
that's
a stuff
wrong.
anymore are the ones who are lost. But I forget what I was saying. I was thinking of the vestments again. Andy, Robert.
No, but you were distinguishing between test-first programming and TDD.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Test-first programming allows you to experience the difficulty of using your design.
Yeah.
And to challenge your presumptions about what the design should be. So the whole goal of test-first programming. Here's an amazing thing about this. Look at Ruby. Ruby came up and said, "Hey, we're the Ruby community. We started. Rails starts in the age of Agile. So Ruby is the first. Rails is the first framework that is technically Agile. The first book written about Rails is called Agile Web Development with Ruby on Rails. It's the first framework to ship with testing turned on.
Okay.
It should have nailed it, but basically did test-first programming and still does test-first programming. And test-first programming is a failure mode, as proven by that blog post.
This genuinely test-first programming.
It's called going through the motions. You write your tests first, but you never do test-driven development.
Okay, it's sort of like
you're talking about test-driven as a design tool.
Absolutely.
As opposed to just
but then again, there's another thing.
A workflow.
As a teacher at a boot camp, you gotta understand, like, if you say testing is a design tool, that doesn't mean anything to somebody who doesn't already know what that means.
So you got to pair with somebody. You can't even.
Well, you can do that. That's a good help. But we can just say this: the whole point of TD, and the opposite. To make a point about the Rails community, we've created more and more elaborate frameworks to write the actual test. The actual test, the part of the test that testers call the check, which is where you assert something, or you say something should. And we've created in the Ruby world more and more elaborate syntaxes for doing the check. The check is where you write a piece of code that says something equals something, or something greater than something.
You're saying uncheck versus test.
Well, unfortunately, what we call testing, testers would call checking.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use testing. I'm going to use the world of actual professional testers, not the developer lens of what testing is. So the checks are where all the developer tools have focused. And it's the most irrelevant part of test-driven development. Always has been, always will be. You know that a community has completely failed at grok TDD when you look at the tools they've produced, and it's focused on the one thing that's completely irrelevant.
So what you're saying, the real, it's won or lost in the setup of the
Absolutely.
test. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you look at the code in the setup and you see how difficult it is to set something up. And if it's more or less difficult, that's when you're doing test-driven development. And if there's a little bit too much going on, you've got to change the design.
Yeah.
However, here's the fun thing. In the Rails community, they said, oh, this is difficult. Let's create some automation to make the difficulty appear to go away. So why do we have fat model? Why do we get fat model, skinny controller, and Rails, right? So here's the thing. Every structural designer working with their weight in the chemicals they're made of knows that the controller was always the thing that was supposed to be fat, and the model was always supposed to be the thing that was skinny. Why did we do this in Rails? The controller was so poorly designed that you couldn't instantiate it, so it couldn't be tested. So they moved the code that was supposed to be controller special purpose, models general purpose. You have special purpose where special purpose goes, general purpose where general purpose goes. Models are special purpose. We never move special purpose code into general purpose because it increases the outcomes. But because you could not instantiate a controller in Rails, they took all that code and they moved special purpose code into general purpose locations. The answer for the author of the Rails thing was to stop getting high on himself and fix the fucking framework. But the problem was he's a popular high priest, and there was no time in his day signing autographs to fix the goddamn framework. And furthermore, he didn't understand what that problem was to begin with. Why? Because they created automation that made the problem appear to disappear. They created crutches. They put back, this is kind of like that, you know, they use this analogy a lot, the problem with the housing projects in the US, the broken windows projects. People were breaking windows, and when you break windows, you break more windows. So what did they do? They didn't fix the housing projects. They put murals over the empty holes of happy people in the windows. They literally took boards and painted pictures of happy people in these horrifyingly depressing housing projects. So you painted over the problem, papered over the problem, and that's what all this is.
I think that's way more far-reaching that I see.
I've never been accused of that.
It's way, no, seriously, no, I'm talking about that, you're just, I'm actually arguing the opposite. You're just showing one area, but I think that problem is actually rampant, and it's actually infected in the entire industry.
Absolutely, but here's the thing.
There's very little, and in fact, all we're doing right now, especially for the last 10 years at least, is building better Band-Aids. The whole time.
Absolutely.
I've seen no attempts at solving core issues with software.
And every time we put a
all.
Band-Aid on, the thing is, software moves don't heal. You can't put a Band-Aid on a hole, like, software doesn't fix itself. Like,
It's covered up,
said,
it's just sitting there.
you know, it's not like we leave our good software and overnight some shit elves come in and make it shitty. Like, software is shitty because we do. Like, there's no like magical degradation. It's not skin. It doesn't age and it doesn't fix itself. Shitty software is made by shit work.
Yeah.
And when you make shit work, it doesn't fix itself. And then you've got to do work to extend that functionality. That's even shittier. And then you got work that surrounds that, and that's even worse.
Yeah.
And we can't fix this stuff. And it comes down to you saying, what's the most the fundamental principles? It's this. Special purpose belongs with special purpose. General purpose belongs with general purpose. All software development fundamental design principles derive from that single principle on a continuum of specialization and generalization. If people knew where to put code, that would solve everything.
Here's the TDD thing, right? What's helpful.
And also, it would stop us from doing entity-centric or canonical model-centric ORM. And we could even take ORM, we could even take Rails and say, oh, look, we can't put those fields together. We can't put that code in a model. We could, and we just move the code where it needs to be, and the projects would just go fast as hell.
Yeah, but
and when it came time to make a microservice, everything would already be separated, and you'd have to do the work, but you wouldn't have to do the decoupling work. The real problem with making a microservice is disentangling stuff that was never supposed to be entangled.
I don't use Rails myself, but I kind of admire it and see people's like online examples and I think like, wow, that's almost like English or something like that. So
well, people sometimes celebrate the fact they've got no teeth, but that doesn't make it okay.
What's a good reference framework to look at on how to put their code in the right places? So who's forcing people to put code in the right places?
There's an example, right? So I don't know how. I know that some people in the room who are less familiar with TDD. And just the point earlier, how do you know where to put stuff, right? TDD down the right is a means of giving you better factoring the code. For example, we talk about how the setup of this stuff, the battle is won or lost in the setup. For example, if you write tests and you find that you need to inject 3 different repositories and 5 other things into a class and into something before you can actually test it, or a lot of mopping and things like that. That's a smell, right? Because it depends on what. Let me finish, right? No, it doesn't. That's the point, right? It means that you have this central thing, right, whatever it may be, which depends on a lot of other things. And TDD done right gives you, or at least I found this helpful, right? But it makes me think, right? Does this thing have too many responsibilities? Does it deal with more than one thing at a time? Is it too big? Why do I have to inject all this stuff? Because that means that each time I have to do that, I have to, there's state on the outside or something on the outside on which this depends. That's a smell, right? And then you start to factor it. So the value of TDD has never been about the testing for me personally. It's been about getting better quality code, addressing those concerns of where something belongs. Because it makes you think, right?
So I have to start with Rails. I've got this object, a user, and it does stuff, and one thing at a time, I can test. It starts becoming It's easy to test one behavior or one method on one model, and then later on, I find some complicated process where as a user, I need to look at their account, and I look at my inventory levels and like, I need to pull in all that to do my command. So that gets tested. How is that? There's no getting around that functional, well, almost like functional level testing.
Well, that depends, right? You said it right there. A user, it depends. Again, this brings us, it's a gratifying segue into what's a domain-driven design and event sourcing and so forth. Meetup, right there, right? A user as a login account has a login account, but wait a minute, inventory levels, right? A user who has a login account could have inventory levels in another, in one system, and a Netflix subscription in another context. Right there is, wow, the test. I'm trying to set this up. What is testing my user login stuff doing with inventory levels? That you're looking for this sort of cognitive dissonance, and then you start refactoring. That's the value right there, right? As in, no, as I said earlier, that's the red flag. That is exactly what shouldn't happen. That's when you start refactoring.
So would the example be, like he's doing the example of
Yeah.
I work with Rails, so I know see these kind of patterns all the time.
I don't work with Rails, so I may be innocent here.
But with the thing is, you're coming down like your command, it's like the way I see the way out of this pathway is all of these, so it's come in and you've got these things. It sounds like it's supposed as a user that went to like an account, and the thing will, each of those, like to test it, it's not really a query, you're either knowing that like there's several events that have been pushed to create all of that. So they've got their own stores or however that's structured. And then the query, there's nothing to test because all you've done is push pieces of information onto piles, like lists that have like a time series.
Yeah, it's input output.
Time series. So then there's nothing to test there because all you're testing is that when this happened, did I push the right thing on the right piles? Because I'm assuming none of those services would ever, they're not doing transformations, they're not doing queries and other things. What happens, so is there a point where you need to do a transformation? That transformation is based on another pile, like should a service...
Sure, but you don't need to really connect to the store to do that. You can just instantiate one of those message objects, one of those events or commands, and just push it into the code. I mean, I'm diminishing the difficulty.
Because sorry, so you're on this, like, is there times when you're on that ingestion part of the system where to ingest it correctly, you need to know about other things in your stores? Or is that something that can be avoided, or you should avoid it?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's just that when you want to do a test like that, you want to just be able to make the world such that you can just through code create those preconditions without having to set up data in databases and so forth. Yeah. So if you're testing things between systems, I mean that's a different kind of test. That's a hard thing to do anyway. So we're trying to figure out. You always want to be trying to figure out when do I want to do that kind of testing, and make sure that it's sort of like cordoned off, because that's going to be difficult testing to do. But if you get down to the point where you're saying like, I need to test that this is in that system and that is in that system, and when everything is finally turned on, that this stuff shows on the screen.
Yeah. Just push it
probably
to
done it
events.
wrong.
Like, so you just not like your case of your test me.
Well, it's
it's
like if all this stuff shows on the screen, if we already established that you can only display stuff on the screen from a database that's already pre-populated, then the test begins and ends with writing that row to the database and displaying it on the screen. All the processing that made it happen is not relevant to that test.
So isolating it at that line.
Yeah, and then when you finally turn it on, you still may have defects. There's always defects in distributed systems, but there's a very limited number of full system tests that do an exhaustive job of verifying. If you do have that, that basically means that is coupling. That means the coupling is wrong, or that there's coupling that shouldn't exist. So that's one of the things about like, what do I have to do to test that this row of data gets created when these events come in? It's like, well, you instantiate the events and put them into that row writer and see if that row got into the database. That's the end of that test. That's that segment of the system.
Yeah, a
There's
lot
the other
of,
segment.
a lot of the testing for breed sides is actually quite easy. It's given when then without the when.
Yeah.
You're given all of these events, then I have this row,
Well, sure, there's a when.
or this.
Well, there's,
There is no when.
When I
When
say
you're
them,
no.
when I formulate the
No,
row,
there is no when.
of course there is.
There is no
It's-
when.
it's very-
When is reserved for.
And the only reason I'm having this discussion is to suggest that given when then is a methodology that's maybe 5 years old, let's not suggest that that's actually an ideal way to do things.
No, and I'm only using it because it's a familiar way to a lot of people to express stuff. And I think it goes really well with
It's
state
familiar to
Well,
movies.
it really complements state transitions well. Given when, then.
That I agree with.
So,
It's-
but you can also use a subset of that pattern for establishing your tests
Yeah,
for your
But it's not,
remodels.
but I'm gonna say, as somebody,
What's better than given when then?
no, I'm just fucking just, things that we've always had in industrial.
Yes, arrange,
You can say arrange assert.
act, assert, and the only reason is there's no action on that.
Sure there is.
No, there isn't. It's a
Just
listener.
No, it says act. No, it says
Given that I
act.
listened to them, fine.
Yeah.
Given that I
Given these
subscribe to them,
events, hold on,
That's
these
a
events,
ridiculous proposition.
when I formulate a row or compose a row and save it, then this row should exist in the database. There's always,
Redundant.
but the thing, we're way off topic,
Because in your code,
If
you
you
can
can
show
do
in
that,
your own code when
You
you
can-
do that, when you do something to
yeah,
generate.
it's
a row.
there, and if given when then, or cucumber style testing is important, you can
Okay,
always.
fine, when I look at the table.
No, that's not the when, it's when, that's not the action though. Yeah, when I wake up in the morning, when I was born, all these tests, then, yeah, that's the wrong. But that's the value of using it in code.
So I leave it out.
Here's what I'm saying about that. This is specifically why that style of testing is not valuable. Because the amount of cogitation that goes into and frothing about that goes into figuring out what's a given, what's a when, what's a then. It's like, why don't you write down the code in a file without a test framework and run it, and then figure it out, which we tend to call sketching. Sketch the damn thing out, then separate it into setup and act, and if your framework has to separate those things, fine. But you typically don't even need to use a test framework.
What do you think of given and then in its sort of sometimes forgotten role of a communications tool, right? The next guy.
Never been validated, never been proven, and usually disproven when you try it.
you will never find
Yeah.
a business person writing a Gherkin.
No, I'm not talking about business guys. I'm talking about the next guy who cracks open the code the next.
Oh,
Yeah.
to write clean code,
Yeah.
or learn to write clean code. Like, didn't we already establish that writing comments, that the presence of comments often, not always, but often indicates poorly written code?
Oh, yeah.
Well, then clean up the test code.
Oh, well, you're saying code, not Gherkin, right?
Yeah, I'm saying, well, I've always asserted that Gherkin is a mistake.
Yeah.
It was founded on a pile of assertions that were never validated. It's yet another ploy for a few developers to get some new celebrity by inventing something and asserting that it's true. It was always, and technically when we look at it, it's always been a bad idea.
I used a lot of Gherkins, and we're doing way more like inter-object type testing than I care to admit. But like my CEO can read the Gherkin and know what's going on.
Your CEO?
Yes.
Yeah, but you could also just write out. Yeah, you can just write that. You can just,
No, there's
You can just write that, if you're
writing
using a normal test framework that's just hierarchical, you can do that. You can read that. The thing is, I would challenge you, if you can get your hands on an eye tracker and watch where your CEO's eyes are falling when they're reading those specs, I bet you they're not reading them to the level of detail that they're written in. And that's the fundamental usability problem with this.
Having said that, the CEO never really reads until something fucks up, and he's like, okay, what is actually happening here? He's gonna look for that one thing, and he's gonna see it, and it's either the test was implemented
Where,
wrong,
is your CEO technical?
no.
So So if that's valuable, great. I think that there's an alternative design of your organizational structure that stops that from being necessary. Because tests are easier to write without Gherkin. If we make,
If they don't see a productivity gain, they don't have to waste their time.
yeah, you don't have to, programmers don't have to do this. Then, so if you don't take out Gherkin, then you've got a CEO who can't find the answers. Find another process or another culture or another way that the CEO can find answers. Well, I don't know. No, I mean, I don't know. It's important that this happens, but the other question is like, why is the CEO going into seeing this happen?
No,
I don't disagree. If you got no better
when
answer-
it's time to figure it out, we read it, we understood it, and instead of actually telling him this is how it works, here's that test.
That's an organizational problem. That's abandonment. This is one of the fundamental failures of software development, to be a cooperative, well-integrated part of the data system. It's like there's a problem and it's software that the CEO can do this self-service, great. But the cost of making that self-service exceeds reason. So if you take that cost away, that just means that a software developer has to be available to the CEO on demand, commensurate with his level of authority, so that these things can be explained. And the cost will go down. The cost of developing and maintaining Gherkin will go down. What you need is someone there who can answer the question. When the CEO says, jump, I want to know. It's not like, oh, I'm busy right now. It's like, yes, our social protocols and our compacts and agreements and our promises to each other suggest that I will drop everything and be there for you, the top dog in our pack.
I'm not saying this is a dysfunction at all. I'm saying this is as a communication tool, it's
not a communication tool though.
Every line in that is connected to some test program we wrote.
Yes, but you can also write test code that's as expressive.
Yes.
It also has.
So you could actually spend an hour saying, here's where the code is. Here's what this means. I'm not going to write it in English. And I've done this frequently and proven it to myself and to others that you don't have to write Gherkin or Cucumber or any of these things. You can write code if you write the code clean. If you write the code for consumption, if you write code as an exercise in usability, then you don't actually have to go through the transformation into English. It's just about writing things clean. And most test code is written as it's not as important as the production code, so it can be, and it's like, that's the failure. That's not only a failure for the CEO and the ability for business people to read this code and understand it, but it also makes our work go slow. So if you clean up that problem, it's going to benefit both the development team and any executive who wants to read it. But I'm not saying that the executive won't need coaching or won't need help or some guidance, but sooner or later they'll stop needing people. I'm not saying they're going to be able to write code, but I mean, a lot of people can sit around and hear French, but not be able to speak it. And that's part of the human cognitive mechanism. We can understand languages with a little bit of coaching, a little bit of introduction, without having to write it. And I'm guessing your CEO does not have to write the code.
Yep.
So teach him to read a little bit of Ruby and learn how to write tests so that people with a little bit of reading experience can actually get the answers they want. Which means creating something called test models or test abstractions, so that you can do this a lot with UI code. People started calling them page objects, which is a ridiculous failure of proposition. But you create abstractions over your system so that if I'm doing a UI test, I'm really just saying user.username equals something, user.password equals something, submit. There's not a chance in hell that a CEO is not going to understand that. But when the test looks like Selenium driver dot find text box dot, that's fucked up. That means abstractions are missing, So you got to create code for the audience. And if the audience is executives, transforming that code into English is a much more expensive maintenance proposition over the long term than it is to just write it for the audience. Or have some other process in your organization that allows the CEO to hit the big red button that says all hands. You're now on deck to solve this problem with me, and there's no excuses. And that's something that I think as programmers we have a hard time doing because we feel entitled to be buried in our corner, put in a dark closet growing mushrooms and eating pizza. So we feel entitled to not interact. But that problem should be solved, because when you solve that problem, all the other problems, a lot of other problems disappear. I feel like I'm yelling at you for things that are not even things that
Well,
you should just get up and move, and that'll be the spot where I direct this tirade. It's not really even the value anymore. I'm like experiencing all this PTSD just through your point. I realize I'm not even necessarily speaking to your
You
point.
remember me from the.
I do remember that. Yeah, was it?
It was from Polyglot. I was defending ORMs half-heartedly.
Oh yeah, right.
So.
Can you know your face? It's like, I'll keep
That's some of the
extending.
PTSD came from.
I'll keep extending my tirade. Hopefully, at some point along here, I'll remember who this is.
Anyway, thank you very much for the talk. I have to reload my brain. So.
Cheers. What's your name again?
Anthony.
Anthony, I'm Scott.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you'll never have to deal with me again.
Well, we can take this to, I'm getting hungry, so we should get some dinner, so. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're still taping.
Millions of years. I think we lost a couple thousand, but.
Thousands of which was not.
Yeah, exactly.
And